Hello, my name is Adam Elliot and this is Animates, Creators Inspired. Well, like, most people, I watched a lot of animation as a kid and back in the 70s when I was born, early 70s. Animation was quite different to what it is to now. It was less commercial, and it was an art form more back then. And I remember watching shows like The Wombles and The Magic Roundabout, and of course, all the American Warner Brothers shorts, cartoons. But I was never a real, I wasn't into comic books, and I've always drawn, I've always been making things, but I never had a burning ambition to be an animator, and I actually wanted to be a vet. That was the first thing I wanted to be when I was a little kid, when I grew up, was to care for pets and animals. Animation was not something I really sunk my teeth into until I was in my mid-20s at film school. Before that, I was selling hand-painted t-shirts at a craft market here in Melbourne every Sunday, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I dabbled in acting at school, and I had fantasies of being a portrait painter. But animation certainly wasn't on my radar. I sort of fumbled my way into film school, and even when I was at film school, I thought I'd do 2D animation. Stop motion was not something I thought would become my career, and all these years later, it's something I'm still doing. Well, look, I always feel a bit guilty when I get this question, because I'm not a big animation buff. I don't race out to see the latest Pixar film, and I mean, I love going to film festivals and watching other people's short films, and I do see as many European feature animations as I can, but I'm not an addict. I prefer live action films, and I love documentaries. And I suppose most of my spare time is spent reading. I'm a big reader, and if I'm not reading, I'm drawing. So I certainly love art house cinema, and I've always had a sort of, I like films that have a darkness to them, and so I am drawn to sort of more Eastern European films. Of course, Jan Švankmajer, of course, I love his work, and any Estonian animation I love. I've been to Estonia, and but it's not a single sort of person or art form that that inspires me. I mean, I just sort of, to get inspiration, I just look at the people around me, and that's why drawing's so important, because that's where a lot of the ideas manifest. And like any other writer too, I have very detailed journals and notebooks that I fill up, and so I really, to get inspired, I just go to my journals and notebooks, and also my family are quite eccentric and interesting people, which is why I base my films on many of them. And so if I'm short of ideas, I just go and stare at one of my siblings or cousins or uncles or aunties. I did a 1-year postgraduate diploma in animation, but when I was there, I did animation because I knew that because I drew, it would be interesting to see my drawings come to life. But when I started there, back then, of course, 2D animation was still on cells and acetate. Computer animation really hadn't kicked off. And it wasn't until I was there that my lecturers saw that I was actually better at making things than I was at drawing things. We did little, test clay exercises, I suppose, and they saw that my little blobs of clay seemed to have a lot of personality and were endearing. And so there was a real push from them for me to make my graduate film as a stop motion film. And at the time my father had a hardware shop, which was convenient, so it meant that I could get lots of cheap materials, paint and glue and wood and nails, and so I made the film for economic reasons, and again I didn't have a burning ambition to pursue a career as a stop motion animator. It was only because the film started getting into film festivals and there was a lot of encouragement from the government film agencies here, the Australian Film Commission, for me to do a follow-up. So that's what I did. I did Cousin, and then that did well, and so then I did Brother, and then Harveykrumpet. So they just kept going. It wasn't a plan. I suppose that saying you're only as good as your last whatever, well, it's true for filmmaking. You're only as good as your last film, and luckily each film has been successful critically, not so much financially. And so I thought, well, I never look too far ahead. I just do one film at a time. I don't do any commercial work. I don't do ads or TV series. I just write. I'm a bit like Woody Allen. I just write a script, make it, then write another one, then make it, and I just do them back to back and somehow survive. And I suppose at film school there was, I did come up with an idea of, I did like the idea of a trilogy of trilogies, which is, I had this plan of maybe, if the films allowed me, I would do 9 of them, and I'd do 3 short shorts, 3 long shorts, and 3 features. And so what am I up to, number 7 now? So I've got 2 left, and then I can die. So I suppose if that's I suppose that is a long-term ambition, but I've never taken it seriously. I never thought I'd get to number 7, but here I am. So yeah, see what unfolds. There's also that saying, well, it's not a saying, is that every filmmaker eventually makes a flop or a dud or a box office disaster, and so we all hope that film is the last film I make just before I retire, not the second one. So number 9 can be a disaster, and then I'll bow out. But the thing is, stop motion, it's incredibly slow to produce, incredibly expensive, and I've never, I'm grateful each time my films are financed, because I look around me and see how rare they are for other filmmakers, and so I don't take them too seriously, and I just, if this is the last film I make, then so be it, because they're just, it's taxpayers' money that I'm using mostly to make my films. So I see that I have a responsibility, and I suppose that's why I put so much effort into each film, because I know that it might be my last. So I should make it as high a quality as I possibly can. Well, look, I think there's a couple of factors. Because I live here in Melbourne, a lot of my friends are filmmakers and actors, and so a lot of these big names sort of live here in Melbourne. Eric Bana is here, and Jeffrey, and Kate Blanchett's originally from here. And I think too, with big name actors, they love doing animation because it's quick, they don't have much rehearsal time, they can be recorded anywhere in the world, they don't have to wear makeup, and there's a real novelty factor. And back then, I approached Geoffrey Rush because I, been a fan of all his films and theatre work, and I just thought that he had the right tone to his voice, and that he would give a very authentic performance.
Harvey was born into the world upside down, back to front, and was christened harveykrumpet. His father's name was Maciek, a lumberjack with hands as big as shovels and hair that smelt of pine needles. His mother's name was Liliana, a weary woman with lead in her veins from working in a mine. She was obsessed with counting her fingers and had conversations with people that just weren't there. The other villagers stayed well clear. But she didn't need friends, now that she had her miracle.
So yeah, I just approached him at a Q&A event here in Melbourne and went backstage and did all the things you're not meant to do, and that is give the script directly to the actor. And he said yes, and that was it. We're good friends still, and since then, with Mary and Max too, getting Philip Seymour Hoffman and Tony Collette, Eric Banner, it wasn't too difficult. You really just got to navigate the agents. That's the hardest bit, is getting the script to the actors. But once they read the story, particularly Mary and Max, they saw that it was different to other animated feature films, and it had an adult flavour to it, and had some serious messages that it wanted to convey. So they all jumped on board more for because of the story, and we certainly didn't have the budget to pay them what they would normally get on a live action film. So they were very generous with their time and gave great performances, and very lucky. I mean, this new film, it's a similar scenario where we've got this wish list of actors we'd love to get, and we'll be approaching them soon, and you just cross your fingers and hope that they enjoy the story that you've written down, and that's what it's all about. I mean, I often tell students and emerging filmmakers, particularly in animation, to not obsess with the animation and the aesthetic, to really focus on the story and do as many drafts as you can. And I mean, my scripts take years to write, and I suppose I'm a perfectionist, and you never quite perfect what you want to say, but the more you write and rewrite, the better the story gets, hopefully. And of course, the aesthetic and the production designs, are important, and you want the film to look as beautiful and cinematic as possible. But because I don't have the budgets of Aardman and Leica and those big studios, my films always have to be a compromise in a way. I mean, that's why there's not much walking in my films. That's why the characters speak very little, so we don't have to do lip sync. So we're always cheating in a way, and that's why my films are narrated too, because the narrator saves us so much time and money. It's so much easier to get a voiceover to tell the story than to get the actual character.
Ernie was a taxidermist, like his father, his father's father, and his father's father's aunt. It was the swinging 60s. Everything was new and groovy. Ernie was old and dusty, and often wondered if he had become an exhibit in his own store.
So yeah, we have to be very economical and efficient, and it's being a low-budget filmmaker or an auteur or an indie filmmaker means that you have to really think laterally, and you get used to having to compromise. But I never compromise with the script. That's one thing I'm very, I put a lot of effort into the writing, because really that's cheap. It's just 80 pieces of A4 paper, and just me and a laptop, so this new film's, it's taken 4 years to write, and it'll take another 3 years to finish. So yeah. Well, it's a 90-minute feature stop motion, entirely stop motion, called Memoir of a Snail, and it's my first film that is sort of, I mean, it'll be narrated, but it's voiceover, and it's from the point of view of a middle-aged woman who's reflecting on her life. So it's more of the same. It's a bittersweet comedy tragedy tale of a melancholic woman here in Australia. I can't tell too much about the story, but it's certainly in the same vein as Mary and Max. So it'll be, you know, my aim with all my films is very simple: is to make the audience laugh and to make the audience cry, and if I can do those two things, then I'm hopefully succeeded. So I get asked, you know, why has there been such a long gap between the two films, and I really don't have a good answer. It's just I'm a slow writer, and before I even write, I have to get angry about something. I can't just sit down and write a quirky tale. I have to, you know, a lot of my films come from a sense of injustice and anger about a friend or family relative, family member who's been done over or mistreated, and you know, all my films are essentially about the underdog and people who are the other and people who are marginalised and misunderstood. And so it takes me a long time before I find the story I want to tell, and it sort of usually starts from a point of anger. That sounds odd, doesn't it? But yeah, I don't want them to be angry films, but you know, I have to feel a sense of rage or injustice about something before I can begin. Oh, absolutely. You know, I see my films as a very cathartic process, and in many ways my films are very indulgent. It's a great way for me to get on my soapbox and preach about all the things that frustrate me and all the horrors in the world and the abuses of people. So yeah, it's good to have an outlet and an art form that allows me to, you know, purge all my angst and frustrations, and but also hopefully entertain. You know, my father was an acrobatic clown, and he always reminded me that no matter what I called myself, whether I'm an auteur or an artist or whatever, at the end of the day I'm an entertainer, and whatever I put up there on the screen should be nourishing and enjoyable for the audience to watch. And if they shed a tear, then that's a bonus. I remember after Mary and Max, a film critic said about my work, he used that quote, "Without the dark, the light has no meaning." And that really resonated with me, because I said, yeah, well, it is. You really, the best comedy does come from tragedy, and nobody's life is completely happy, nor is it completely sad. There, you know, you can, it's shades of both. And so I'm really, in a way, trying to just mirror how everybody's life is sort of led, and that you know, there's happy moments, but there's also very tragic, sad moments. And yes, some people have far more tragic lives than others, and but I think, yeah, it's no one has a perfect life, that's for sure. And so I'm more about highlighting the imperfections about people rather than their good qualities, their flaws. And I think Mary and Max really was a culmination of all the other films I'd made, and really was about, particularly Max, about somebody who really embraces their flaws and everybody else's. And I suppose Max is, I was thinking this the other day, Max is probably the wisest character I've created, and because he is based on my real pen pal in New York, you know, even though he's incredibly lonely and melancholic and misunderstood by society, he's actually very wise, and the real Max, although he's not called Max in real life, he's a very wise person too. The advice I give to any sort of emerging or young filmmaker who wants to pursue stop motion particularly is to not give up so quickly, because I think a lot of people are fascinated by stop motion, but when they give it a go they get very frustrated and throw in the towel way too quickly, and they have very high expectations of themselves. They want their films to look like Wallace and Gromit or a Leica film. So I always say start simple and just animate a blob of blue tack or plasticine or just a Coca-Cola can or any sort of object. Just move it around and you'll quickly find out whether you like it or not. But there is the real magic to stop motion that 2D and computer animation doesn't have. I think it's because when the audience see the fingerprints and they know that that object is a real tangible tactile thing, that there's a real magic that happens when it comes to life. I'm a big journal writer, so every day I write in my diary, and that becomes a great resource for all my scripts. I'm very simple. I have a very simple life. I walk my dog and I draw every day if I can, and I read a lot. I go and see films, of course, but my films are very all-encompassing and take up all my time, unfortunately, and I don't have time for much else. But I'm a very dull person, actually, and when I think about it, I don't have any other hobbies or interests. Oh, that! We didn't talk about that. Look, I try not to think about that too much. It was a nice thing that happened 20 years ago now. Look, any award, it's like a bottle of wine. They're almost the same size as the Oscar and a bottle of wine. You drink it and you feel great for a while, but the next day you wake up and you've got a hangover and you've got to move on. Look, the Oscar was very nice, and of course it opened a lot of doors and allowed me to keep going. But I think any award is really just a crowbar to the next thing you want to do. It helps open doors, but it does that. It just jimmies them open a little bit. The doors don't fly open. You still got to work hard, and you still got to really write a good story. But yeah, Oscar, I don't know. He's just sitting up there, actually. Can you see? I often forget where he is. He's somewhere in the house, and there he is over there. So no, I try not to look at him much. No, well, interesting. He's a bald, naked man, which a lot of people sort of, he's just hiding his bits with his sword. And I've got a picture somewhere of Harvey, Crumpet, myself, and Oscar, and my dad pointed out of the three bald men. I love that expression, life is not a dress rehearsal. It's a bit of a cliche, but you really only get one chance, and now that I've just turned 50, I'm realising, time's running out, and to really focus on the project in hand. And I also love the idea of just do one thing and do it well. I think we're all bombarded with so many things that we can do and watch and see and pursue, and a lot of us are a jack of all trades but master of none. So I think the best advice I can give people is find your calling and try a lot of things, and then when you do find your calling, just focus on that and block out all the noise. And there's also that thing about, I think, playing the piano or any sort of thing you want to pursue. If you do, I think it's at 50,000 hours or 10,000 hours. If you spend 10,000 hours doing, gardening, or 10,000 hours playing the piano, just by doing it, you will get better. So, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful in some way.